The fourth son didn't arrive amid celebrations or happy days. He came into the world through a woman who knew all too well the bitter taste of being set aside. Leah, his mother, lived in the constant shadow of another. She wasn't the chosen one of Jacob's heart. A single glance was enough to see where her husband's attention rested, always on Rachel, always on the more beloved sister. Each baby born from Leah's hands was like a silent cry begging to be seen, valued, considered. But affection slipped like water through fingers, never staying. First came Reuben, then Simeon, followed by Levi, 3 sons who couldn't fill the void. And then the fourth boy was born. When he came into the world, something changed inside Leah. She didn't say, "This time he will love me." No, the words were different. "Now I will praise the Lord." It was as if in that instant she dropped the heavy burden she carried and lifted her face to the sky. The name she gave the boy was Judah, which means praise. He would carry this mark engraved in his identity, like a seed thrown in difficult soil, awaiting the right season to sprout. Subscribe to the channel for more moving biblical stories and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any video. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click the Super Thanks button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. Judah's early years were spent surrounded by brothers who grew up hearing stories about the God of Abraham, about covenants made in arid places and supernatural apparitions. But they also witnessed envy, constant competitions, disguised quarrels. Every meal carried tensions that no one needed to name. Every gesture was a hidden competition. Judah, younger than 3 brothers but older than several others yet to be born, grew up in this fragile balance between what he witnessed and what he felt inside. And even as a child, there was something different about him, a way of observing first, speaking later. A silence that wasn't just absence but waiting. He wasn't the most agile or the most explosive in temperament, but when his voice sounded, the others stopped to listen. It was as if his words had their own gravity, something no one could define in that moment, but which over the years would become impossible not to recognize. If you enjoy stories and are fascinated by prophecies and end times mysteries, don't miss our ebook, Welcome to the Apocalypse. Get your copy right now at the link in the video description. Judah was raised amid the constant noise of 11 brothers, each with their peculiarities, their wounds, their ambitions. And in that family where names carried more meaning than bread on the table, everything became competition. Who gained more attention? Who performed their tasks better? Who would be remembered? But Judah, he didn't enter that game as much. He stayed observing, recording everything internally, like someone who knows that one day those lessons would make sense. Reuben, being the firstborn, tried to take the reins, but was too impulsive for it. Simeon and Levi, full of anger, responded with aggression to any provocation. The younger ones, still discovering themselves, just went with the flow. Judah, however, didn't need to raise his voice to be noticed. His mere presence already said something. He had a solid yet serene manner, like a river that seems calm on the surface but underneath has constant strength. He knew how to listen. And when he opened his mouth, he didn't waste words. Each sentence came out with purpose and precision. This made the brothers respect him, even if they didn't confess it out loud. When some conflict arose, they turned their gaze to him, and almost always there was a solution coming from him. In the fieldwork, when the flocks scattered, it was Judah who had the knack to bring everything back together. When someone got hurt, he improvised the necessary care. He seemed to be in the shadow of the older ones, but carried a strength that hadn't been fully manifested yet. As time passed, something began to change. Jacob's eyes, previously glued to Rachel's sons, began to perceive that Judah was more than he appeared. It wasn't favoritism, but it was recognition. And that, within that family marked by clear preferences and fierce envy, was something rare, like a small flame lit in the midst of total darkness. The atmosphere among the brothers had been charged for a long time, but that day crossed all limits. The poison that had been stored finally overflowed from one's mouth and contaminated the others. The chosen target was Joseph, the boy of dreams, the father's absolute favorite, the one who had colorful visions and wore that tunic that shone too much for the rage-filled eyes of the others. The truth was that Joseph didn't make things easy. He recounted his visions out loud, as if he were already sovereign and they merely subjects. That opened a crack between him and his brothers, and that crack became a precipice. They were working far from home when they spotted Joseph approaching in the distance. The tunic swayed in the air, and just one exchange of glances between the brothers was enough for the conspiracy to be born from hatred. "Let's finish him off." It was direct, without detours. A murmur became an order. The idea circulated among them like an unprotected blade. It was then that Judah, always him, entered the middle with more calculated reasoning. "Kill him for what?" he said, like someone who had already evaluated all the consequences. "Later we'll have to hide the body and live fleeing from his blood on our hands." The others paused, waited. Judah took a deep breath and continued. "Let's sell him, that's it. We sell him as merchandise and that's it. He disappears from our existence and we still make some profit from it." It was inhumane, without a doubt, but between taking a life and selling there was a gap. And in that instant, even if no one saw it, Judah didn't just prevent a murder, he completely altered the course of history. Joseph was thrown into a dry pit initially, and then handed over to merchants, as if he were a worthless object. The tunic was stained with animal blood and presented to the father, feigning tragedy. Jacob tore his garments and sank into a grief that seemed bottomless. But while Joseph disappeared on the horizon with his hands tied, Judah tried to deal with the weight of the choice he had made. And it was precisely this weight, this guilt that had no name, that pushed him away from his father's house, onto a dark path where he himself would lose much more than he could imagine. Judah disappeared from family life. After that whole situation with Joseph, he could no longer face his father, nor process his own thoughts. He hit the road and distanced himself from the family, like someone fleeing from their own face reflected in the mirror. He ended up in a region called Adullam, and there got involved with the Canaanites, a people who didn't follow even remotely the principles of the God of Abraham. It was in that place that he found a woman, daughter of someone named Shua. They married, lived together, and Judah tried to build a new existence, as if the previous one had been buried along with that tunic stained with Joseph's false blood. He had 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah, and with them a new chapter began, but carrying the same heavy baggage that he never truly resolved. When his firstborn, reached adulthood, Judah arranged a wife for him. Her name was Tamar, but was wicked, so wicked that God ended his life. It was a heavy blow. Tradition determined that the next brother should marry the widow and generate offspring in memory of the deceased. So Judah gave Onan to Tamar. But Onan, wanting the benefits of marriage without the obligation of inheritance, refused to fulfill his role. Again, God acted, and Onan also died. Judah, afraid of losing his 3rd son, made a promise to Tamar that she would marry Shelah when he matured, but it was a disguised lie. He said that just to appease the situation. Deep down, he thought Tamar brought bad luck, as if she carried some curse. And so he sent her back to her father's house, widowed again, with a future trapped in empty promises. The years dragged on. Shelah grew up, and nothing changed about Judah honoring his word. Tamar grew tired of waiting, tired of being treated as if she didn't exist. She knew Judah wasn't going to keep his promise. Shelah was already a grown adult, and nothing had changed. So she decided to do something bold, one of those acts that makes anyone hold their breath just thinking about it. She learned that Judah was going to pass through Timnah for the sheep shearing. A routine event, almost unimportant, but there she saw a chance. She removed her widow's clothes, covered her face with a veil, and positioned herself at the roadside, in the place where prostitutes made themselves available. Judah passed by, didn't identify his daughter-in-law, and imagined she was just any woman offering services. He made an offer. She agreed, but demanded a guarantee as future payment. He, without suspecting anything, handed over his seal, the cord and the staff, maximum symbols of identity and authority. He slept with her and left. Days later, Tamar was pregnant, and the news spread like wildfire in dry brush. It reached Judah's ears, who was furious. How could a widow committed to his son get pregnant by someone else? "Bring her here, we're going to burn her," he ordered, full of a sense of justice on his lips and hypocrisy in his gestures. But before they lit any fire, Tamar sent a message. The father of my child is the owner of this seal, this cord, and this staff." When Judah saw the objects in her hands, it was as if the ground disappeared beneath his feet. Absolute silence, exposed shame, painful memory. "She acted with more justice than I did." That was all he could say. And there, for the first time in years, Judah looked in the mirror of his own soul and saw who he really was. Tamar bore twins, and one of them, Perez, entered directly into the lineage of kings. Judah, for his part, began to transform internally. He returned to approach his brothers, the family, what he had abandoned behind. And when the food shortage fell upon the land like a crushing weight, it was Judah who rose up to take action. The years kept passing like wind carrying dead leaves. Hunger arrived without warning, knocking on the door of all families, including Jacob's house. It was the kind of crisis that offered no alternatives. Either you acted or died trying. So Joseph's brothers, now mature men, went down to Egypt in search of provisions. What they didn't know was that the strict governor who commanded the grain stores was precisely the brother they had sold as a slave. Joseph recognized his brothers immediately, but didn't reveal himself. He wanted to assess, wanted to understand if their hearts remained hardened as before, or if time had worked some inner change. When they returned home, with sacks full of wheat and heavy hearts, they carried a demand. "Next time, bring Benjamin." Jacob categorically opposed. Benjamin, Rachel's youngest son, the most beloved after Joseph's supposed loss. Losing him would be like stopping breathing, but hunger pressed again, the wheat ran out, and the decision needed to be faced. It was at that moment that Judah stood up. It wasn't Reuben, it wasn't Simeon, it was Judah. The same one who in the past negotiated a brother, now offered himself as guarantee for another. "If I don't bring Benjamin back safe and sound, the weight will be mine eternally," he said firmly. There was no acting. This was someone who knew exactly what he had done and didn't want to make the same mistake. So they went down to Egypt again, taking Benjamin. Everything seemed to be going well. Until on the return, the nightmare materialized. Joseph's silver cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Accusation, imprisonment, absolute guilt. And it was at that instant that Judah did the unimaginable. He stepped forward, prostrated himself, and asked to take his brother's place. "Keep me in his place." The words came out like arrows soaked in true pain. Was he the same man as before? No, he was someone who had gone through fire and come out different. And when Joseph heard that declaration, the past exploded inside him like a storm. He no longer had the strength to keep the secret. Joseph couldn't bear it anymore. The disguise fell like a melted mask. He cried out loud, sent everyone out of the room, and there, between tears and suffocated words, revealed his identity. "I am Joseph, your brother." Time froze, the brothers paralyzed. The guilt previously buried returned like a punch to the stomach, and no one could articulate anything. But Joseph didn't seek revenge, he sought restoration. He embraced each of them, cried leaning on Benjamin, and then ordered them to go back and get Jacob. Judah, who until recently carried the burden of betrayal, now led the mission to bring their father. And when Jacob learned that Joseph was alive, his aged heart almost couldn't take it. The journey was long, the emotion even greater. When they arrived in Egypt, it was Judah whom Jacob chose to go ahead and organize everything. It was he who articulated, cared for, protected. The same son who had distanced himself back then was now the patriarch's right hand. Jacob looked at Judah with renewed eyes. He no longer saw just a son. He saw a man transformed by time and choices. The brothers noticed this too. Judah no longer needed to prove anything. His presence brought security. His word carried authority. They settled in Goshen, a fertile and isolated region where shepherds could live in tranquility. The Egyptian people respected Joseph, and because of him, all of Jacob's family was honored. Hunger continued devastating the known world, but there was sustenance there. Jacob aged rapidly, knew his days were ending. He called each of his sons for a final blessing. When it was Judah's turn, he didn't speak of past mistakes, didn't mention the failures. His eyes saw beyond the present, and it was there that he spoke words that would cross the centuries, words that illuminated something beyond kingdoms and territories, words about a scepter, about a lion, about someone yet to be born. After Jacob's words, something transformed in the atmosphere. It wasn't just a common blessing from father to son. It was as if each syllable had a weight of eternity engraved in it. When he looked at Judah and spoke of the lion, of the scepter, of the authority that would never depart from his descendants, it seemed he was contemplating something far beyond that instant. He wasn't just speaking with his son, he was speaking with future generations. Judah listened in silence, not with arrogance, but with that serenity of someone who had already been broken by life and learned to listen without anxiety. He didn't become a king, didn't erect monumental altars, nor found legendary cities. But there in Egypt, his house began to multiply, sons, grandsons, great-grandsons, and without making a fuss, the tribe of Judah began to gain relevance. He became a kind of discreet patriarch, someone who walked with respect among his people, even without seeking spotlights. He was no longer the young man who fled from problems. He was the man who faced them head-on, but without the need to shout. While the people lived comfortably in Goshen, there was still the shadow of the promise. This is not our final place. It was pleasant, no doubt, but it wasn't the true home. Judah understood this, and even without seeing the promised land with his own eyes, he kept in his chest the certainty that his descendants would see it. Time continued its course, white hairs appeared, physical strength was no longer the same, but Judah's presence was still felt, in important decisions, in significant silences, in the tribe's guidance. He aged far from the land where he was born, but with his heart closer to God than it had ever been. And when he finally closed his eyes for the last time, there was no celebration, no glorious burial, just silence, a silence loaded with meaning. Because sometimes those who make the most impact aren't those who shout loudly, but those who leave deep footprints. The years continued their rhythm, and Jacob's people became a nation within Egypt. But before everything transformed, there was that sacred, intimate moment when Jacob summoned his sons one by one on the verge of death. When Judah approached, the old patriarch no longer had much energy in his hands, but his eyes saw too far. Time no longer belonged to him, but the words that came from his mouth would cross countless generations. Judah is a lion. It began like this. The phrase fell heavy in the atmosphere, full of images. A young lion that rises from the hunt, and no one has the courage to challenge. Jacob spoke with a father's voice, but with a prophet's tone. He spoke of royalty, of dominion, of a scepter that wouldn't leave the hands of Judah's tribe until the one to whom it rightfully belonged arrived. There it wasn't just a father saying goodbye to his sons, it was a foretelling, a prophetic sign. Jacob saw what no one else saw, that among all his sons Judah would be the conducting thread of something eternal. The scepter represented power, justice, legitimate authority, and it wouldn't be transferred like a common inheritance. It would remain there firm until the right moment. Jacob also spoke of wine, of eyes darker than usual, of clothes washed in grape blood. Strong images, almost enigmatic, that seemed more like poetry than prophecy. But every detail had meaning. It was as if at the end of life Jacob was drawing the beginning of another, greater, deeper one, hidden in the lines between the words. Judah heard everything, didn't retort. He just bowed his head like someone who understands that certain words are too big to be commented on. And with time, what seemed like just metaphor began to take concrete form. Because from the tribe of Judah would arise a king, not just any king, a king with a harp in his hands and fire in his eyes. Judah departed in silence. There's no record of lamentation, of solemn procession, of sacred cave. No crowd accompanying the body, no altar erected in his honor. Just time moving forward, covering his story with the dust of generations. He left in Egypt, far from the land of his ancestors. But the absence of celebration didn't mean absence of importance, because some men don't need statues when they've already left marks on people. What remained of Judah wasn't a tomb, it was a name, and that name echoed with force. In the following centuries, among so many tribes, Judah stood out. It grew, conquered territory, led battles. And when Israel asked for a king, it was from Judah's lineage that David arose, the shepherd who became a warrior, who became a king, who became a legend. But Jacob's prophecy didn't end with David. It went beyond. as if all along there was an invisible road being built behind Judah's choices, stumbles, and new beginnings, a road that led to Bethlehem. And there, among animals and hay, the scepter manifested itself again, not in gold, but in the form of a child, a baby, a direct descendant of Judah, born of the royal lineage but wrapped in humility. It was as if everything Judah lived, his mistakes, falls, difficult decisions, transformations, was being woven with purpose. Each moment of his was a point on the timeline that led to that birth. The Lion of the tribe of Judah had arrived, not with a roar, but with a newborn's cry. Judah's story ends where many people don't even imagine it truly begins. Because in truth, the strongest part of it isn't in the birth, nor in the blessing, nor in the royal lineage. It's in the transformation. Judah wasn't a hero from the beginning. He was a common man, full of flaws, wrong decisions, cowardly silences, and emotional escapes. He sold his brother. He deceived Tamar. He made serious mistakes more than once. But what marks Judah is that he didn't remain imprisoned in these mistakes. He fell, yes, but he also rose. And each time he got up, he was a little different, more mature, more responsible, more aware of the weight he carried in his hands. He didn't try to erase the past. He faced it head-on. And that's how he became someone trustworthy. That's how, when everything was hanging by a thread, he put himself in the other's place. When Benjamin was at risk, it was Judah who said, "Keep me." That gesture changed everything. We learn from Judah that God doesn't choose perfect people to fulfill big promises. He chooses people who have the courage to change, who have humility to recognize their own mistakes, who don't run away when the situation gets heavy. People who learn to be firm without being harsh, who keep quiet to listen, who speak when necessary, and who assume the consequences without pushing the blame onto anyone. His life is a reminder that redemption is possible, that the past doesn't have to be the end of the line, that pain can become a starting point, and that even the most broken stories can be used for something eternal. Judah started trying to be noticed, then fled from responsibility, but ended up being the foundation of a promise. And when we look at our own journey, full of ups and downs, we can remember, the same God who used Judah still writes new stories with people like you and me. If you enjoyed Judah's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, don't forget to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we'll explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.